Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. This week I got to talk to boss Debbink, who's a learning strategist at J&J. And it was a fantastic discussion because we didn't just talk about learning, we also talked about skills. There were several things that stood out to me in this conversation. The first one is the depth with which J&J is focusing on skills. They're all in from the top of the organization down through how they're communicating. They have gone in on skills and see it as the thing that they need to do to move forward. Boss focuses specifically on the tech organization. One of the things that I found really interesting is that they use their talent leaders to determine the skills that are needed and not needed. So they're using several technologies. Some of them infer, some of them assess, some of them sort of record or take. So there are several technologies that they use. Some of them assess, some of them infer, some of them are sort of the system of record for skills. But they use the talent leaders as the arbiter of the types of skills that their employees need. As often happens these days, our conversation turned to AI. I think we made it 38 minutes into the conversation before we talked about AI. But at one point, I asked Boss if there was a place that we're using AI where we're a little ahead of our skis, where maybe we shouldn't be using it yet. And I thought his answer was really interesting. He said, no. He said, no, we need to experiment with AI. And we need to understand what it can do. He didn't define it this way, but dumb work that we can replace with AI to free us up to do more strategic types of things. Finally, just one piece of advice that he offered to L&D people. He said, we need your perspective. We need the perspective of L&D, but we also need the perspective of the younger generation in L&D. Bring in ideas to your organization and be vocal about them. This was a really great conversation. As always, this was a really great conversation. We hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy it, please rate the podcast wherever you listen to the podcast. And if you're interested in some of the research that Red Thread does, please visit us at redthreadresearch.com. Thanks again. Welcome to Workplace Stories, Baz.
Thank you, Danny.
Happy to have you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, I think we've been sort of seeing each other here and there for quite a while, but we finally had an opportunity to talk a little bit ago when you were going to come to our Elevate conference, and turns out you can't. But
yeah, I'm still very sad about it.
We'll take some notes for you. But it was a great opportunity to get to know you a little bit and hear a little bit of your story that we're going to hear today. And so I'm excited for you to tell it. So 2 questions to get started. The first one is, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
My name is Bas Debbink, clearly not a U.S. name. I was born and raised in the Netherlands. I moved to the United States just about 30 years ago this July. I've lived in New Jersey all that time, those 30 years. Actually, don't mind it all that much. But to go back to my career, I would say I've been with Johnson & Johnson 20 years this year. I started in a very technical role in information security. I moved into server management, ran a 24/7 support function, moved into quality and compliance for the technology organization, which is where I was offered my first true learning and development role in compliance training. Now, I can see you thinking, wait, compliance training in a technology organization? How exciting is that? Yes, it was interesting, that's for sure. But it did lead me to my passion. I always enjoyed mentoring and coaching people. So when they gave me the opportunity to do training for initially 1,500 people and later on 5,000 people, I'm like, yeah, no, I can do that. So I did that for a few years, moved into sales training at one of our medical device companies, went into enterprise training. About 3 years ago, I've been part of one of the corporate functions within Johnson & Johnson, taking care of training initially for our corporate business technology organization. They manage the enterprise platforms like your big HR systems, procurement, legal. And in the past year, I moved into the strategy and operations team where I'm responsible for learning and development for the entire technology organization within Johnson & Johnson. And in addition to that, I'm also responsible for the skills assessment strategy for the technology organization.
Okay, so I love this. You hit on 2 things that I'm very interested in right now. The first is this idea of development for IT, because it's such a big thing right now. Technology, as you know, is changing really rapidly. And so how do you keep everybody up to speed on something that is constantly changing? And then the other thing that you mentioned was skills. So I want to hit on both those things. I'm also very intrigued with your title, which is learning strategist. And so we want to get a little bit into strategy as well. What's going on in your organization and how do you see your role and some of that kind of thing?
Yeah, fair enough. So as a learning strategist in our small but mighty learning and development team, I'm responsible in helping some of our functional leaders identify what it is that their organizations need to get up to the next level. In from a skill perspective, from an upskilling perspective, from a career development perspective. So I really take their problem statements and turn them into learning objectives and then help them along the way. As I'm sure many people in your audience and you yourself know, people often come to us learning professionals and say, I have a training problem. No, you have a problem. I agree. But let's first make sure that is actually a training related problem. If it is, I'm more than happy to help you navigate those waters and I can take your entire organization through that. That's what the learning strategist in our team does.
I love that. So talk a little bit about the structure of J&J today. So you said that you work with different teams. What does the overall structure of the employee development organization look like?
That's a good question. It's a complicated answer. So learning overall at Johnson & Johnson, and certainly the ecosystem is owned by HR. We have a learning organization. We have a chief learning officer. Each individual sector, as we used to call it, used to be the pharmaceuticals and medical device. We used to have consumer as well. That got split off. But each of them have very distinct needs from a learning and development perspective. But we try and standardize as much as possible. But a company the size of Johnson & Johnson, not that easy, have a lot of different needs, a lot of different requirements that we try and meet as much as possible. So when I focus just on the technology organization, so that's everybody who reports into Jim Swanson, our CIO, full-time employees, many more contractors. It really is around how do we make this technology organization at a healthcare company as effective, as smart, and as future-focused as possible. So that's the remit of our team within strategy and operations in the technology organization.
Okay. So what is top of mind for you right now? What are you prioritizing?
Yeah, it's really I wouldn't say a conversion to a skills-based organization because that's been going on. It's really trying to understand how do we take time. I don't want to say take away time from people to do their learning. We'd like to do learning in the flow of work. I know everybody's been talking about it. It's not as straightforward as it sounds. So that's, I would say, a main challenge right now. The other part is how do we really identify those critical skills for each of the functions within a technology organization, whether they sit in an experience design function, an architecture function, an engineering function? What is it that the people that are in these functions really need to be the best at their game? What does their career mobility look like? If you have an organization where everybody's at the top of their game, what does that mean from a career mobility perspective? You'll need to maybe start looking at some adjacent roles and maybe move into a different organization and start the journey to upskilling there. So those are some of the main things that we're dealing with. The other part of my responsibility, the skills assessment piece, we're really trying to see how can we get an accurate view of where we are from a skills maturity level. As I'm pretty sure most companies where they're at is at a very subjective level, self-assessments. I think I'm great at writing Python, but ask me to write Hello World in Python, you can't do it. People tend to overestimate their own ability. So how do we bring in some more objective or inferred skills into that picture and say, okay, what is actually the most accurate? Can we aggregate all these data points into a single score that can help the employee move up in their career?
Okay, so let's talk about skills for just a second because I'm fascinated by this topic. Does J&J have like an overall skills strategy for the entire organization, or are you handling it by?
Yeah, we do have one for the entire organization, which is owned by our global talent management organization. So clearly I collaborate with them a lot. As you can imagine, a technology organization has some very specific needs, tend to be a lot more granular from a skills perspective, whether you're talking about programming languages, platforms, SaaS solutions. But in the end, we want to make sure that from a technology perspective, anything we do from a skills strategy can be scalable. So it can be used at an enterprise level. So that collaboration is really tight. We really enjoy working with my business partner on that side and have some very smart people there that have this very strong background in IR psychology, psychometry, and can help me understand that part of really assessing people's ability. And I look at it, okay, how do we get our technology folks who are usually just heads down, typing away on the keyboards or working on delivering technology solutions to our business partners. How do we get them upskilled?
Okay. So how do you determine what skills your organization needs?
Yeah, so our ecosystem has a learning experience platform that has, I'd say, maybe about 5,000 skills in its ontology. Now, again, ontology is more general and more related to what are the higher level skills. So what we've done in technologies, we've identified about 100 critical skills for the technology organization. And they're not just digital skills. I'd say it's about 60% digital and 40% business skills. I know power skills, soft skills, core skills, durable skills, whatever name you want to give it. We do want to make sure that we split those up between not just the digital skills, but those business skills, as I call them, are also really important. And they get reviewed every year by our technology leadership team, so our CIO and one level down, and say, yeah, this is the strategy for the coming year. And then that is going to be the focus for the coming year, making sure that when you pick an area for upskilling that's more relevant to you, it should be aligned to this overall technology priority skills.
You also talked a little bit about verification. Is that the word you used?
Yeah, objective type assessment, skills verification. Yep,
yeah.
certainly.
So trying to figure out like who has what skills. As you said, some people tend to overestimate. We know some people tend to underestimate as well, depending on some things. And so how are you approaching the idea of verification?
Yeah, it's a new topic. At the enterprise level, we've been trying to find a solution that kind of fits everything. It's not been easy. From a technology perspective, we did a pilot at the end of last year and said, okay, who are the vendors out there that can help us do that? Yes, we can probably build this internally as well, but it's going to take a lot of resources. You have to have, again, the scientific rigor in building these assessments. You have to have the subject matter experts to give us the questions and then verify the answers, because it's not just, do you have this skill, but at what level of maturity is this skill? So you have to get that guidance from our subject matter experts as well. So we decided to go with a buy solution rather than a build solution. Had some interesting observations. So this year, I'm trying to go in a little bit of a different direction and make that a little more organic rather than here's another test that you need to take. One of the things we learned, especially in this job market, people are really anxious when you ask them to take a test. One, to make sure that it's in their best interest. Like, here's a learning journey that's going to take you 20 hours. But if you can show that you have mastery of certain topics, maybe half of that you don't need to take. Now it becomes valuable to the employee.
Interesting. Okay. So are you using assessments for all verification, or are there other methods that you're using as well?
So the answer, no, it's not the only thing we use. And it's not even on all the 100 skills that I identified. It's really, what are the 3 to 5 critical skills that are testable, first of all? And there comes in the component about that. Coding skills are much easier to test or verify than a business skill like empathy or good communication skills, but different discussion. So we also use a skills inference solution. If you've been out reading about some of the stuff that our CIO has shared with the Financial Times and Fortune, he always talks about using AI to verify Johnson & Johnson employee skills. We had it with a vendor. We actually brought it in-house last year that gets data from some of our HR systems, and through generative AI says, okay, based on all this information, we can infer that this person has these skills, and based on kind of the information that's in the data, we can also actually estimate at what level of knowledge that skill sits.
Okay. So it sounds like J&J is all in on skills. Would you say that? Like you're in it?
Definitely. Yeah,
okay.
I would certainly say that. Yeah.
Tell me how you got there. So some organizations are, do we, don't we, when it comes to skills?
Yeah.
How did you guys just decide to leap in?
So from a self-assessment perspective, that was part of our learning experience system, so part of our ecosystem. So it came with the package. And we do encourage people, especially during our performance review cycles and mid-year review cycles, go in, assess yourself on these skills using our global job architecture to identify if you have this role, we can assume you have these skills. So go in and do that. If you have skills from a previous role or even in your current role that are not part of the job architecture per se, just add them and do it yourselves. The skills inference piece really was driven by Jim, our CIO. Again, he's very knowledgeable about AI in general. And certainly from a skills perspective, he wants to make sure that we use the latest technology to leverage that to infer these skills based on our information. It's the data that drives the results. If you're in your human capital system, if you need to put in your performance plan or your year-end goals, and that data isn't all there, then of course the model doesn't have much to work with. But it's a validation also from, I know we talked about skills validation, but this is data validation. What's the quality of the data that goes into our model? And we can use the output to see, okay, this kind of looks accurate, or you know what, something's off. And we use it at a very high level, at the organizational level, really for these senior leaders to say, what does it look like across my organization? Where are some of the gaps that we think we might want to spend a little bit more time in the year to come?
Okay. So I think earlier you mentioned the 100 skills. There are 100 skills that you are shepherding through the tech space. Is that right? Is it just 100 or is it around 100 or how?
It's around 100.
It's around 100. Okay. I was like,
Yeah.
Did you just cut it off?
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a little bit more. Sometimes it's just a little bit less.
You got it.
New skills get added every year. Generative AI wasn't really a skill 2 years ago. Prompt engineering didn't show up until again, it existed, but not as a commonly known skill. And certainly in the technology space, it moves so fast, like a spatial computing or quantum computing. We need to be flexible to have those skills there.
So a lot of the leaders that we've had on this podcast have talked about the value of doing skills, right? And it's an interesting thing because so many organizations are just at the beginning of this that it's hard to sort of assign an ROI to it. Like we are not to the point where we can assign an ROI. How has your organization gotten buy-in from everyone to continue down this path, even though there isn't necessarily an ROI associated with the work yet?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's a challenge with any kind of learning and development metrics. Skills aren't any different. How do you show that the person has progressed in their skill maturity, not just from an assessment? Because I can be a really good test taker and I can pass every assessment really well. But that doesn't mean that my manager, my customer actually is able to observe that behavior. So we're using every tool that we have available, from 360 feedback, from a mentoring and coaching perspective, from stretch assignment perspective, in addition to the learning content, to make sure that we give the employees an opportunity to really show that they change the behavior and it actually leads to better performance on the job.
Okay. It's such an interesting space to me because we see a lot of organizations sort of finally putting numbers around skills. So for a long time, everything's been super nebulous, and then we're finally putting numbers around skills. What you do with that has been interesting. So in some organizations, for example, they're like, we need this data so that we can feed it into other systems and get better data about like who we need to hire or what kinds of skills, where we line up with respect to the industry that we're in or different things like that. And then we see organizations that are like, we want people to understand sort of their progression using hard numbers, which I think is so valuable. At the same time, a lot of the progression is perceived progression because the measures that we use for performance are often perceived. I wondered if you had thought about that at all.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the same thing with any kind of learning metrics. Like, hey, I can take 20 hours of online content. Like, okay, I met my training goal, but if I don't apply it, it's useless information. The same thing with skills. Since you brought up the talent acquisition component of skills, they've been doing skills assessment for much longer, I think, than learning and development has as part of their onboarding process. And that helps with workforce planning. Now we actually have data from an organization on their current structure and distribution of skills in their organization. So the question around hiring, upskilling, attrition is much easier to answer because now you have a holistic view of incoming talent that's out in the marketplace, talent from maybe competitive intelligence perspective. What are those skills that are really desirable in the market? Do we have them? Do we need them? It's cheaper to upskill than hire for new talent. And again, with the hope that the employee feels valued enough that, look, my company is investing in me as an individual, wants to help me along my career development journey, and is giving me the opportunities to do so.
Okay. And that's my final question I want to ask, because it seems like not only is J&J in on this, like your employees see value in this as well. How have you messaged skills within the organization to individuals?
Again, fortunately, through our CIO, he brings it up at every town hall. The importance, our head of HR also generally will have to answer a question. And that's the great part there is in the past 2 years at every town hall, which is quarterly, there has always been a question about development and learning and upskilling. So it's already kind of part of our culture, which is, as a learning leader, that's fantastic to see. Every time someone asks a question, I start smiling ear to ear. So that messaging has come from the top, which is great. Certainly in the technology organization, at the larger, the enterprise level, we have about 140,000 employees all across the world. People are certainly interested, but it's a much bigger nut to crack, certainly from a communication perspective as well.
Let's take a breather. Let me ask you a couple of questions that help our audience get to know you just a little bit. So with this first question, I've been wanting to ask a guest forever, but no one ever chooses it. So you let me choose it. What is your DJ name?
I would say Dutch.
That's a good one. Totally.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Didn't have to think too much about that.
Okay. Tell us your favorite joke.
Oh, man. All right. It's going to take a little bit, and you'll probably understand why I picked this joke. A man goes to a monastery because he wants to become enlightened. So when he checks in, he's told, you're not allowed to speak. Once a year, you get 1 minute with the head of our monastery, and you can ask, or you can say one thing. So a year goes by, man is struggling. Finally, the year's over. He goes to meet the head of the monastery, and the master asks, how are things? And the man answers, bed hard. Okay. And he leaves. Year goes by, man is still not feeling it. It's like, where's this enlightenment coming from? And I'm not getting it. Year goes by, goes back to the head of the monastery. And again, master asks, how are things? Food cold. Master just waves him away. Spend another year here. Year goes by, goes back to the master. Master says, how are things? And the man goes, I quit. And the master goes, you know what? I'm not surprised, because you've been here 3 years and all you've done is complain.
Oh my gosh. Okay. That's great. Final question. And this one, a lot weighs on this, boss.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pineapple on pizza, yes or no?
Oh, absolutely not.
I could not agree more. If Stacia were here, she would be arguing with us.
Here's the reason. I don't eat pizza.
Oh, that's not fair.
I know, which is something else. So even though I was born and raised in Holland, I despise the taste of cheese.
No way.
I do, which is probably why they kicked me out. And now I've been living in Jersey for 30 years. But yeah, it's tough.
Kind of makes me sad for you.
Yeah, no, I know. People are very surprised.
Let's take the conversation that we just had about skills and roll it into employee development. As you probably know, employee development, or L&D, kind of latched onto skills early because more data gives us better ideas of what needs to be developed and all that kind of stuff. And it's taken off from there. And now these seem to be playing a smaller role in some of the larger skills organization discussions. But I'm really interested in how you see skills benefiting the employee development efforts within your organization.
Yeah, I really see it as a focused effort rather than taking direction from a really high level. Like, okay, we're going to focus on generative AI this year. Maybe I don't need it. Let's focus on cloud engineering. That's great for if you're a cloud engineer or you have an interest in going cloud engineer. It's that those personalized learning journeys where I think the real benefit is coming from. Okay, what skills do I have? What skills can I develop for myself? Let's use the technology that's available to me to actually identify from a personalized level what my best path forward is. And people like us who have been in the learning and development space, personalized learning used to be very time consuming. With the more recent capabilities, I'd say that's where the time saving comes from. It's much more democratized, I would say, these days to really create these personalized learning journeys. All we hear from people, I don't have time to learn, which I understand everybody's really busy. And it gets worse if it's training that you're not interested in, that isn't going to help you in your career development. So getting rid of those barriers is going to be extremely helpful.
Okay. And I think that's a really interesting point. We've been peanut buttering approaches for a really long time. Like we think like training to the average, right? Like the average person doesn't average, or training to the bottom because we're worried about risk. So that is interesting. Like we can now use a scalpel basically to determine exactly what people need instead of something a little bit broader. What kinds of technologies are you using to deliver some of that skill development?
Is really more that skills inference piece where we have now an additional data point other than self and maybe manager or peer assessed data that can say, I think I'm great at this. Evidence doesn't really support this. Let me rethink my statement and help people along the way. Our learning ecosystem offers a capability. And again, it's something that some of our learning leaders have discussed on a very regular basis, where people can say, I have this role currently. I want to move to this role. The ecosystem will actually give a list of skills and say, okay, these are the skills you have. These are the skills you need. You're at this level. This is where you need to be. But again, it's based on kind of the self-assessed data. So if I continue to overestimate myself, that career progression can be a really difficult journey. So that's why we want to add, the more data points we have, we can say, okay, the more accurate my starting point is.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk a little bit about that. So you talked about a couple of pieces of skills tech that you have. You're using assessment, you're using an inference tool, you're using probably some sort of like overall skills piece of software or defaulting to one. So talk a little bit about sort of your skills ecosystem and how that interacts with your learning tech ecosystem.
Yeah, so our ecosystem is really combined of two core systems. One is what we call our kind of experience platform, where things like skills assessment are located. And then our learning delivery system is the other half of our learning ecosystem. They are, I'm not going to say integrated, but they are combined. So if I do my assessments on skills on the reflection side of the ecosystem, it will recommend learning courses that are on the delivery side. So it will help me, instead of me having to search for these topics, I can just click on a link and it'll take me to learning that's related to the skill that I'd like to improve.
Okay. You also talked about the more data points that you have, the better recommendations you can provide. Are you all looking at different data points that you can absorb or intake into those systems as well to provide more?
Yes. Yeah, we are. And even if I just focus on kind of the skills inference piece, your human capital platform data is a starting point. Your recruiting platform data is another point. There's recognition software. I attended the vendor webinar recently where they now actually made that part of their platform where, hey, if you get an award for something, that probably means that you're good at it. So you can use that as well. If you have something like financial assistance at your company, if someone goes to get a degree, you can use that information for infer that they acquired those skills.
Yeah. Are you tapping into work data at all?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
That's awesome. Talk to me a little bit about something that you're pretty excited about as far as technology that you're using to develop people.
Yeah, it's really that skills assessment work. It's really now trying to see like how can we leverage these new capabilities, especially actually have we gone like over 35 minutes without seeing AI?
I think we have. I was holding off as long as I could.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's fantastic. But clearly there's opportunities there. And of course, I'm very excited about it. I'm also skeptical because I've been around a very long time. All the gray hair is evidence of that. I don't have the shiny object syndrome, even though I'm fascinated by all this stuff. I have a healthy dose of skepticism. I've heard a couple of people talk about the agentic coaching or agentic mentoring. I think someone coined the phrase pocket coach, which I immediately captured and called it a Tamagotchi, a little virtual mentor in your pocket. That's the stuff that I would get really excited about, whether that's from a role-playing perspective or just, hey, rather than me scheduling time with my mentor who may not be available for the next 2 weeks, let me see what I can get out of talking to an AI agent that maybe I've built not necessarily a relationship with, but if I interacted with them, it has history on our conversations and it has a wealth of knowledge that I can tap into.
And that's what I think is interesting, especially with some of the things they're doing with the data that is coming from some of those discussions, right? So it's interesting that it can adapt based on what you know and how you're interacting with it. Oh, this person doesn't know a lot about the US government. We need to make sure that they do, and like getting you smarter on that. But the data that can capture and then feeding that data into the rest of the ecosystem is really interesting because we used to have to assess separately and then we train separately and then we reassess and blah, blah, blah. And now all that stuff is happening in one fell swoop. Like we're doing it all at the same time. And it's changing the way that I'm thinking about just learning in general, but also the ecosystem. If these pieces go away, then what actually is learning technology, because learning technology will be integrated into all the things.
Yeah, no, for sure. And again, don't start by saying everything needs to be integrated, because then you'll never get there. Just start, even if you have different data sources or data collection systems. Build a front end that can compile, can intake all those data points. Start playing around and see what insights you're going to get.
I actually do want to go a little bit into, because of the tech space fairly well, I want to go a little bit into AI. Sorry.
No, that's quite all right.
I'm interested. So what do you think AI will realistically change in L&D over the next, 3 years or so?
So that is a pretty comprehensive question. So let me start at the micro level. As a learning and development practitioner, I think it can be extremely helpful in doing some of the tasks that are now manual, like defining learning objectives, finding out what the problem is that your customers are trying to solve, in creating outlines of potential solutions, in helping you play through some of the scenarios like, hey, I'm thinking about this solution. Let me look at the pros and cons. This is my audience. This is the expectations. What is the likelihood that I'm going to succeed in actually doing that? So again, if you're in a learning and development space, there are a lot of ways to make your job more effective, which will free up your time to do more interesting things. Again, I know there are some L&D people out there that are like, I love doing this stuff. We do. That's why we're in this field. But there's so much more that we can do if some of these repetitive tasks can be sliced in significantly smaller pieces, so we can actually think more creatively and work with our customer to come to these solutions. At a more macro level, as a recipient of a learning and development function, as a learner, as a leader, let me see, where are the gaps in my organization? What do I need in my group to be the most effective? Do I serve my customers? Am I getting work from my customers, even internally, to deliver work? Do I have enough resources to do it? If I get 2 requests coming in asking for the same skill, do I have the 2 people, or do I have to now have the one person either take twice as long to do it? Show me the insights so I can make decisions around workforce planning as a leader. So bringing it back down to the learner level, talked about the coaching, where you have immediate access to a wealth of information that you can tap into, what I've mentioned before as well. Look, take your training. It's going to take 10 hours, but wait a second. If I can show that I have this foundational level, maybe I don't need all 10 hours. Maybe there's a little bit left for me, so I can, again, this laser focus or this scalpel, as you mentioned, kind of dice it down to the information that's really required. I mean, learning continues to be an extra activity. I mentioned it before. Everybody talks about learning in the flow of work. That's great. And it happens. It's the 70 in the 70-20-10 rule. Where AI can help there, that's something that I'm still trying to figure out. It's more on I would say, the standard learning where AI can help. But again, it's the smallest portion, or the least effective portion, really upskilling. So it's really understanding, like, how can we observe the behavior? What does this person do differently on Monday after they take the training? And how can I empower my people leaders to observe that behavior, notice that they're actually performing better in their function or in a certain role, and document that? That's where the quality of the data becomes so important. If I do a great job and my manager says, yeah, boss did a great job, that's fantastic. But if I do any kind of inference, that's not going to help much.
Interesting. Do you think there are places where maybe we're a little bit ahead of our skis, where we shouldn't be using AI?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'll tell you the reason why. I think the main challenge is right now, organizations that are trying to upskill their people in AI or generative AI are focused too much on the how rather than the what. You need to be able to spell LLM. Okay, well, that's a start. But what does it actually do? Well, if maybe I don't need to know that. If I turn on a light switch, I don't need to know how electricity works, but I need to know how to walk to a light switch and turn it on. Same thing with AI. So I think we're still behind because of that, because we've been, again, talking very generally here, we've been focusing on the wrong thing when it comes to upskilling people in AI. Show them how it helps their function. Show it how they can use it, even in a personal setting. When I started people to talk, thinking about how to use AI, Johnson & Johnson, very known for its credo. And I said, okay, rewrite the credo in a Beastie Boys rap. And it's fantastic. It's amazing. It just blew my mind. And if you make something that's really familiar to people and say, start playing around with it, that will get them started. And of course, this is playing, but playing is learning. So it's really getting their hands into applying the skill rather than just learning about.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. Boz, it's been really great having you on. I want to wrap up with just 2 final questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful. So the first one is, how can people get a hold of you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm the only Boz Debbink there, so it's very easy to find.
That seems crazy that you're the only one. All the people.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And then the final question is what we call our purpose question. We ask this to every person on our podcast. And that question is, why do you do the work that you do?
Yeah, and I think I started that when I talked about my career. I just really enjoy mentoring and coaching people and becoming the best version of themselves. I started that, I think, the year after I joined Johnson & Johnson. I got involved with our leadership development program in technology. These are fresh graduates and kind of helping them get up to speed. We had a program that had veterans come in and people from underserved communities to get corporate experience, took that on and just really enjoyed doing that. So again, once I was offered the opportunity to do that on a much bigger scale, I couldn't say no. And I'm really glad I didn't. I love what I do, especially from the skills. It's very innovative. There's a lot of focus. And I know like 3D TV, that at some point that's going to go away. In the meantime, I'm just loving every second of this.
I love it. Boz, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, anytime.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcasts so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.